Hello, BookTube. Just a quick video here while I sound you out on a subject that came up yesterday. Yesterday I was doing a library tour, my ongoing endless library tour, and I mentioned a book of collected book reviews by A.S. Byatt. And in the course of mentioning that book, I mentioned that, of course, her famous novel is Possession, and that a lot of you probably know it and like it. And Sarah Richards left a comment on that video saying that Possession is one of her favorite novels, that it is something she goes to over and over again, and it never lets her down at any time and for any reason. She called it my book for all seasons. And that got me thinking about that phenomenon, which I think is probably universal for book people. I think all of us probably have a book for all seasons, maybe more than one, maybe just one. But I think that probably your book for all seasons is not necessarily your favorite book, nor is it necessarily a book that is meant to be uplifting or, optimistic or anything like that. I'm not quite sure that I understand the mechanism of what that is, of what that book for all seasons is, that makes it such a refuge, such a surefire thing. No matter why you're going to it, it's the one that's going to answer your question. It's the one that's going to be what you need. And it, of course, immediately got me thinking what that is for me. What are my books for all seasons? And there are a couple. There are a handful. Not the books that you might think, or not the books that I might list immediately as my favorite books. Like, for instance, The Two Towers, the middle book of Lord of the Rings, is one of those books for me. But by far and away, I was thinking about times when I've been in a waiting room, or I've been reading by a friend's hospital bed while they're unconscious, or where I've been grief-stricken, or bored, or in need of company. And one book came to mind more than any other, and that is The Diary of Samuel Pepys. This is the Penguin Classic Shorter Pepys, edited by Robert Latham. This is a fairly hefty book. I also love Everybody's Pepys, which is edited by O.F. Morsehead and illustrated by Ernest Shepard, the famous illustrator of Winnie the Pooh, who does black and white illustrations all throughout this thing. And when I thought about that, I realized that The Diary of Samuel Pepys is probably my book for all seasons. He wrote it as a diaries. Private journals were a kind of a literary fad in his day. He was a figure at the Navy. He was a public figure. He was fairly well known. And from 1660 to 1669, he kept a diary. But it wasn't an official document at all. It was, in fact, written in code, although his code is fairly juvenile. It's pretty easy to figure it out. But more than written in code, it was also written in secret. It was meant to be, and very much is, a kind of weird psychological sounding board where Pepys writes things virtually every day, certainly every week, something in his journal that would have had him drummed out of the naval service in a minute if it had been public. It would have been scandal. It would have ruined him. And that it kind of sort of ruins him even today. You read some of these entries, some of these things, they're written with a total absence of self-consciousness. And I think that accounts for their charm. He will write about swacking his wife a great walloping blow across the face, and then realizing, as she's crying, that he was wrong, that the reason why he did it was fraudulent, that he didn't. It turned out that she was right and not him. And he'll include both those things, both the deed and the realization. He'll write a long entry about the brutality that he inflicted on a boy servant in his house, first whipping him and then tearing his shirt off and beating him some more, because the womenfolk of the house accused the boy of lying. And he notices the price of everything, every last little thing, which is kind of understandable. He came from, almost nothing, and was really a self-made man, so money was important to him. He celebrated it. He celebrated how much money he had set aside, what his standing in the world was. He also celebrates in his various entries little things. Whether or not a feast that he laid in at his home for some guests went off well, and how much it cost. Whether or not he's managed to get a nice bookcase made, and how it looks. Whether or not he has the newest kind of blouse, and whether or not it suits him. out in public. And he's often remembering the members of his family or the anniversary. Every year he has an anniversary celebration of the day that he was cut for the stone. He had a calcification that he had to be cut for by a surgeon. Otherwise, it would almost certainly have killed him. The pain would certainly have driven him insane. And miracle of miracles, he survived the operation. It had to be strung up like a piece of meat and carved from underneath, and it worked. And I think the reason why this is my book for all seasons is precisely that unguardedness. That when you spend time reading Pepys, yes, it's a barrage of proper nouns and proper names and places and people. It's good if you're, for instance, this is not meant to be a pitch, because, of course, the one thing you can't get someone to think about this book is to get them to make it their book for all seasons. They'll have one of their own. But if you want to read it, it's good to have a heavily annotated edition, something that tells you who's who and what's what. And almost certainly you will be reading an abridgment, because it's very long. It's 10 or 12 volumes in a generously annotated edition. And a good, sizable abridgment, I think the Shorter Pepys is probably the best one. It's possible, if you know the diary backwards and forwards, if you've read everything in it, it's possible to pick out a big, satisfying volume without really leaving out anything. There are a lot of entries that don't have that particular Pepysian punch to them, where he makes some observation or notices something or thinks to himself about something. There are quite a few entries that don't do that. So it's possible to make an abridgment that doesn't do serious violence to the original. And if you're going to read such an abridgment, you want one that is good at identifying the people in the entries, because it's all name-dropping, it's all gossip and whatnot. And none of it was meant for public consumption. That's the amazing thing. When you're reading Pepys, you feel as if you're just in a friend's company. Totally unselfconscious, totally not designed for retweets, for the public concern. In 1669, he had been for a while suffering from painful eye strain, which is understandable, because he would often write up these journal entries late at night by one candle, after a long day of studying documents in dim lit rooms and whatnot. But anyway, in 1669, he decided to give it up. He decided to stop writing his journal. The alternatives, as he notes himself, of course, when he decides to stop keeping his journal, he decides to write about it in his journal. And he says that the alternative would be, if he didn't want to stop, the alternative would be for him to dictate. And he couldn't do that. He knows perfectly well the kind of thing he's including in his diary, and he can't include that if he's dictating it to someone else. They would hear his thoughts, his lecherous thoughts about everybody from a serving wench at a tavern all the way to the mistress of the king. He couldn't say any of that. He couldn't talk about any of the licentious or violent stuff that happens in his own household. He knows that. So he knows he has to give it up. And he says it's a moving entry. He says that he feels like a part of himself is going into the grave. He feels, and those of you who keep diaries, those of you who keep journals, I myself am a lifelong journal keeper, and it would feel that way if you stopped. It becomes absolutely a habit of ordering your thoughts, of ordering your memory. I think it's extremely healthy, even apart from the healthy benefit that it has on your prose style. It benefits your prose style immensely to be using the English language to convey things every day. That is immensely helpful. Of course, he worried that he was going blind, and he didn't go blind. And he wrote copiously for the rest of his life, but never like this. Never anything like the diary after that. And ever since the 19th century, when it was found and decoded and brought to life as a book, it has been just a source of joy to so many people. And it is definitely a source of joy for me. It is my book for all seasons. And I wanted to make this quick video not only to tell you a little about it. I think I've mentioned Pepys many times on this channel, so it's probably not a surprise, but also to ask you what yours is. What is your book for all seasons? Do you have one? And if so, kindly tell me about it. Absolutely. If you're a booktuber, feel free to make a video about it. I would love to hear about it. Those is exactly the sort of bookish, idiosyncratic thing that I just love to hear about. So I'm going to wrap this up. Let me know. And thank you, Sarah Richard, for the comment. That was wonderful. I love the community in my comments field anyway, but that just got me thinking. And will unfortunately, for all of the work I have to do, it will get me reading Pepys for the rest of the day. not. I absolutely should not, but I'm going to do it anyway. So I'm going to wrap this up for now, but I'll be back. Thank you, Book 2.